Welcome back to the Jungle Fever podcast. I'm Ethan Sargeant. Ayden Crowley is right next to me, and we are here to react after draft weekend. It was a fun NFL draft. A lot of crazy things went down. Shedeur Sanders slides all the way into the fifth round. Travis Hunter slid one pick, but it wasn't to the Cleveland Browns. He ends up in Jacksonville to go hang out down on the Bay with the Jaguars. And there are a lot of other things to discuss when it comes to the NFL draft. However, we are focused on the Bengals here, and they sure had an interesting draft. 6 selections in this past weekend's draft. Let's start with Thursday, and let's start with pick number 17, where the Bengals make the selection of edge rusher Shemar Stewart out of Texas A&M. We have talked about Shemar Stewart at length on this podcast. We have talked about the positives, which are there are quite a few of them. He is a freak athlete in every sense of the word, tested out the wazoo. In terms of the relative athletic score, which is a metric that has been used a lot by NFL teams to gauge the athleticism of players based on a variety of different factors that also brings positional value into effect. Shemar Stewart ranked number 1 out of over 2,000 edge prospects with a perfect 10 RAS score. So again, it does not get much better than that in terms of the athleticism, and the traits are undeniable. However, there are issues. Issue number 1 is he had less than 5 total sacks throughout his entire career at Texas A&M. And it is a question that's going to hang on him, right? And Ayden, I know me and you both had some interesting reactions to this pick. I think the first thing I'll ask you is, what was your instant reaction? And then now that you've had a few days to think about it, what do you think about Shemar Stewart at pick 17?
Absolutely. Yeah. Just first things first, and I'm sure this goes the same for you. Just everything we say about these players, I hope they absolutely crush it in stripes.
For
Now
sure.
they're in
For
Cincinnati.
sure.
I hope that they go out
They're
and
all
just
Pro
ball.
Bowlers.
I hope
Yeah.
they ball. Now, with that being said, I really hope I'm wrong with how I feel about a couple of these picks, because my initial reaction to the Shemar Stewart pick, first of all, I wasn't too surprised just because of how the way the board fell. And it seemed like, especially as the pick got closer and closer, I saw a lot of rumblings online that that's kind of where the Bengals were leaning, especially with Walter Nolan going the pick before to
Yep.
Arizona. So my initial reaction, I wasn't too shocked, but at the same time, I was extremely frustrated because this is just a general trend that the Bengals have had, as particularly with their first round picks for a while now. And I think it just constitutes this front office's inability to adapt and inability to change while everybody else is doing it. And I think that shows in how much we struggle to compete at a high level despite the amount of talent on our roster, specifically at the quarterback position, which is the hardest one to get done. But my main gripe with this pick is that we just went through this, 3 years ago with Miles
Nope.
Murphy. 2 years ago, excuse me, 2
Yeah.
years with Miles Murphy. It is almost a carbon copy pick. You have this guy who is big for his position, extremely athletic, extremely strong, can win with a bull rush, but not quite anything else at the most part. He doesn't have a deep bag when it comes to his pass set moves. And we are drafting him on traits alone, and we're hoping it works out. It hasn't with Miles Murphy. He's somebody who Trey Hendrickson desperately needs a running mate. He desperately needs somebody who can alleviate some of that pressure. And despite that, he led the league in sacks even without one. But could you imagine the damage he could do if he had one? And Miles Murphy just hasn't panned out. Could he pan out in year 3? Maybe. I hope
It's
so.
got to be this year, really. I mean, we have seen a trend
Yeah.
where edge rushers have kind of had their big breakout year in year 3, especially recently. I think back to Rashawn Gary, who had 12 and a half sacks in Green Bay in his third year. Even Trey Hendrickson, his explosion came in year 3 when he was in New Orleans. So there are certainly questions, right? And I think Bengals fans have every right to be. I think the word that I've used a lot is trepidatious. It's a big word, but it is a word that I think applies very well to the situation, because what trepidatious means is essentially cautious, right? You want Shemar Stewart to be a 10 plus sack guy every single year. And there is a world where that happens. But, and where I do share some of Ayden's concerns, is the Bengals now have the onus on them, right? They are the ones who now have to bring Shemar Stewart up to a level where they're comfortable with him playing on, I imagine, left end with Trey Hendrickson coming off the right, and they can both play that. It also seems, and we'll talk about this later in this video, it does seem like this defense may change a little bit next year in terms of alignments and the way they invested some of their picks, namely drafting 2 linebackers. I do think that there may be some changes to the way that they set up this defense next year. I think they could maybe switch to a 3-4 front, which could open up some opportunities for Shemar Stewart at the outside linebacker position. But we'll have to wait and see with that because right now, I think the Bengals, that also playing 3-4 places a lot of trust in your secondary, and I just don't know if the Bengals can have that just yet.
Yeah.
So I was like Ayden. I'll go first here quickly. I was also a little bit worried initially, and now as I've gone, it's been 72 or so hours since that pick has been made, and I think I can work with it. It is not like I'm not going to give this pick an A per se. By the way, I don't love draft grades. I don't think that they're a good, I don't think we're going to do draft grades just because I don't think they're
supposed to know.
Exactly. There's no real way to truly judge a draft, especially after we have never seen any of these guys play a single game for the Bengals. You can do it, I think, 2 or 3 years later, but right after the fact, I'm not going to grade this draft. What I will say about Shemar Stewart is, first off, and this is a common theme, by the way, for a lot of the Bengals draft picks this year. They all seem like very good people. And I know that it's a little bit of a weird thing to say, but last year, of course, they took the character concern with Jermaine Burton, right? It seems like this year they kind of pivoted back towards, Demetrius Knight, who we'll talk about in a second, was a captain at South Carolina and is a 25-year-old with a wife and 2 children, by the way, which is crazy to me. Carter Barrett was a team captain at Clemson, the other linebacker that they drafted. So when you look at how the Bengals have operated this year, they have gone for guys that Shemar Stewart interviewed so well. He was a guy who I really I enjoyed his interviews because not only was he somebody who clearly seems motivated, but also seems like he's eager to prove a lot of people wrong, including the 2 of us, which again, we are all for Shemar Stewart to be that guy. I am a little concerned about how the Bengals are going to use Shemar Stewart. And I think that that's where me and Ayden are kind of agreeing here, is that I just don't know if they can afford to, I do know that they can't afford Shemar Stewart to not work out, right? Because if Shemar Stewart doesn't work out, that means you've whiffed on 2, and barring a Myles Murphy breakout this year, that means you've whiffed on 2 edge rushers in 3 years in the draft. And that's capital you just cannot get back. And it is capital you cannot afford to waste.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the thing that I also always go back to is we're in a win now window with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins. We've shown that in the way that we have done contracts with Joe, Jamar, and T. We are in a position where you need to maximize those years where you have 9, 1, and 5 on your offense. And in order to do that, you need to draft, in my opinion, you need to draft high impact guys immediately, especially in that first round. And so when you're taking a project guy in the first round, I don't see it. It's hard for me to get behind it because especially in that first round with all the top end talent, you need to nail those picks. I mean, we've seen what the Eagles have been able to do with their draft classes and how much impact guys they get in the drafts, particularly in the first round. And I think they got another one, again, shocker, with Jahad Campbell falling all the way to 31 for him. So it's just mind blowing. But I do want to bring up maybe something that could help prove Ethan and I wrong. Paul Dannard's tweeted this out, and it's a lot of the RAS that you talked about, relative athlete score, with these guys, particularly who are 206 pounds since 2015, right? And so they have an RAS of 9.8 or above, and just a couple names that I'll list out, all of these hit, right? So it's Montez Sweat, it's Myles Garrett, it's Rashawn Gary, it's Trayvon Walker, who has had a breakout here this past season, it's Aiden Hutchinson, it's Yaya Diaby. So all of these guys, and I think Yaya Diaby actually plays a lot like Shemar, so potentially.
Yeah, those are names that you want Shemar Stewart to turn into. Obviously, Garrett is the ceiling, and obviously they share the college connection. But I think you're looking for, and again, I'm also not expecting Shemar Stewart to have 15 sacks this year.
Right.
That's not fair to him. But I am expecting Shemar Stewart to contribute, right? Whether that's 5 sacks, I'll be happy with 5 sacks out of Shemar Stewart this year. Again, number one, he would have already trumped his college production. And number two, I think that means that he has made strides. And then you're expecting, if he gets 5 this year, then it's 8 next year. And you could just continue to see him develop and grow. Still a young prospect, by the way, at I believe 21 years old. A guy who's not young, who was the Bengals' second-round pick, is Demetrius Knight Jr. out of South Carolina. He is a linebacker, 25 years old, as I mentioned, probably the biggest red flag with this pick. But let me tell you, when you talk about heat-seeking missiles, this guy flies. I watched when he played against Alabama. It's some of the best film he has because he just flies and he does not miss tackles. Those are two things that linebackers cannot afford to do. Well, one thing you want to do, which is fly. And number two, you can't afford to miss tackles. And against a guy like Jalen Milroe, who is now a Seahawk, who is very, very difficult to tackle in the open field as a quarterback, Demetrius Knight was everywhere in this game, and it's something the Bengals will love to see in that linebacker spot. I also think with the selection of Knight and then of Barrett Carter late in this draft, I think we can officially now wave goodbye to Jermaine Pratt at some point in the next week or two. I imagine he will get released. But yeah, what were your thoughts on this selection, Aiden?
Yeah, first things first, the Jermaine Pratt stuff. I mean, I think the Bengals have made themselves clear. Just the fact that they haven't commented on the issue ever since the trade request that I believe happened when, like back in February or March. So it's been months and they haven't said a word about it. Then they go out and draft 2 linebackers. I mean, writing's on the wall. I think Jermaine Pratt is gone, but this is your Jermaine Pratt replacement. I mean, everything that I've seen from NFL scouts and the people who are a lot smarter than I am when it comes to this stuff is that Demetrius Knight plays a whole lot like Jermaine Pratt. A great compliment for Logan Wilson. And if you haven't, please check out James Rapine's interview with Demetrius Knight.
Oh, it's awesome.
And
It's
his
great.
story is incredible. And he's another one that I think a lot of Bengals
Yeah,
fans.
he was at, I believe, Coastal Carolina.
Yep.
Before South Carolina, was there for a while. He was to sum up some of that interview, this guy was door dashing in between games to get money for his family. It's a fantastic story. He's a great young man and somebody that I'm definitely going to be rooting for. He is, again, and I do love the fit right next to Logan Wilson. I actually think Barrett Carter is very similar to Logan Wilson. I think Barrett Carter is going to slide right into that LB3-ish slot right behind Logan Wilson. And then I think you're going to see a lot. I think, and one of my favorite things about this Bengals draft, there are a lot of positives and there are a lot of negatives. I think my favorite thing about this draft is the Bengals drafted, I think, 5, maybe 6 guys that are going to play early and often. They drafted, yeah, they absolutely need to. And I think they're going to have a lot of these guys playing a lot of snaps from week 1, especially Demetrius Knight. I would not be surprised if Demetrius Knight is your week 1 starting linebacker on the outside next to Logan Wilson, or on the inside, I guess, next to Logan Wilson. So I guess a couple of the negatives about this pick, I just don't love the positional value here. And this is, again, nothing against Demetrius Knight. I am a fan of his. I think he's a great player and he's a great fit. This is where I get into my issue with how the Bengals draft. Ayden kind of spent some of his there. I actually texted him this a couple of days ago, and I'm going to put this analogy out into the open now. The Bengals draft like a horse at the Kentucky Derby. And I am going to explain what I mean by that because somebody listening to this might be like, what is this idiot saying? If you're watching this on video right now, I'm going to demonstrate, but if you're on podcast, I will still explain. When a horse runs a race, they run it with blinders on, right? They put blinders on the side of their heads so that they can't, it just helps with distractions, right? Horses are not as intelligent as humans. They cannot see, they're not as good at perceiving some things. The horse's job is to run straight, right? So the blinders are on for the horse to run straight so that it can run the race in as efficient a manner as possible. That's how the Bengals draft. Their race is their guy. And in this case, Demetrius Knight was their guy. Zach Taylor and Al Golden in the interview after this pick said, we were praying and waiting that Demetrius Knight got to us at 49. Pretend this a burger. Ain't nobody going to take it from you. Nobody's gonna take it from you, man. Um, it's just they zero in on their guys, and I think that this happened with Shemar Stewart too. They zero in on their guy. They do not look at board value. This is my biggest gripe with it all. They do not look at value that may drop, right? And I get that, Mike Green dropped. Clearly, there was some issues with the character. And Mike Green falls to of course, since Baltimore Ravens. There were a number of other, Will Johnson falls to the Cardinals, 2 picks before the Bengals at pick 49 or pick 47. Somebody I think is probably a top 10 talent in this class because of his own injury concerns with that knee. So again, the Bengals just they in this case the race and the blinders were Demetrius Knight, and they were just zoned in on it. And that's why I really think, and it's why I like what they did best on day 3, because I think they got some great value as they went BPA in day 3, especially Barrett Carter, who I think is very good value. And then a couple of the other guys, I love Jalen Rivers in the 5th round. We'll talk about him later. And again, I just they if they took the blinders off, and I don't think Demetrius Knight's a bad pick. Demetrius Knight in himself is a good player. It's just the value of taking a linebacker, especially when you take another one 100-something picks later. It's just that's my main gripe. And the gripe has nothing to do with Demetrius Knight, who I am very much a fan of, and I think he will be a great Bengal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's just like the Bengals during free agency, they don't want to make big splashes. They just kind of they do what you said. They just kind of they go with the flow, whatever it is, fine. But that pigeonholes themselves into needing to reach on these guys in the draft because I mean, again, we hope Demetrius Knight goes out there and balls out. Is he second round, mid-second round talent? I don't think so. I would have been fine with that pick in the 3rd round. I think he slides there. And you're telling me, because Duke Tobin earlier in the week said, we have these picks. We would like more. You're telling me you can't find a trade partner to trade down a couple
There
spots?
were people sliding.
Yeah, I believe the next pick, I believe pick 50 got traded up for. I can't recall the package, but the very next pick. And I think 2 picks later at 52 or 53 gets traded. You don't normally see a Bengals draft where any trades happen on draft
Well,
night.
I believe now, I think it's been almost 3 years since the Bengals have made a draft day trade. I remember in 2022 they traded up for Cam Taylor-Britt in the 2nd round, but it was only a couple of picks. I think they swapped late round picks, something like that. I don't believe they made a single draft day trade 23, 24, or 25. Actually, no, I think they traded down in 23. They traded down in the 3rd round in 2023 and they took Jordan Battle. I think that was their last draft day trade because the Chiefs traded up and everybody was freaking out. I remember about that.
Yeah.
So again, I think that's the issue with the process.
Yeah. It's just a process that you just don't see from other teams across the league.
Well, look at Philadelphia, right? And obviously a lot of people are looking at Philadelphia because they are the Super Bowl champions, but they do this in the draft all the time. They snap up value, right? Jahad Campbell, pick 31. I look at Ty Robinson on day 3. Great player. Guy would have loved to see in stripes. By the way, that's another gripe I have with this Bengals draft. Not one defensive lineman taken. I know that they did pick up not one interior defensive lineman taken, I should say. They did pick up a couple undrafted free agents, but, let's move on to pick number.
One of the best interior defensive line classes we've seen in a while. Bengals in it.
And I like Howard Cross III is a guy that I do like who they picked up in undrafted free agency. We'll talk about undrafted free agents quickly at the end. But we'll go to the 3rd round pick now, which is Dylan Fairchild, the offensive guard out of Georgia. A guy who the stats read very well for Dylan Fairchild. Only allowed 1 sack in over 500 career pass blocking reps at Georgia. He started for 2 years, was a national champion a couple of years ago, has played with Amarius Mims. There is a relationship there, even though he's probably a bit more of a left guard than a right guard. I know a lot of Bengals fans really like Tate Ratledge, who is a guy who actually went a couple of picks after the Bengals in pick.
Lions traded up for him.
Yeah, the Lions traded up for Tate Ratledge in the 2nd round, but the Bengals go for another Bulldog offensive lineman in round 3. There is again every pick will have good and bad. I do like what I see on tape with a lot of what Dylan Fairchild brings. I think, especially in terms of fit, I like this fit a lot because I think it plays to Fairchild's strengths, which is quick pass protection. You're not trying to buy Joe Burrow 20 seconds. You're just trying to buy Joe Burrow a couple of seconds. And I think that that's where Fairchild's biggest strength is in that pass blocking game. He's very good at countering stunts, at being intelligent through the line. I like what I see on tape with that. Um, and again, having championship level experience is something the Bengals have really valued in a lot of these drafts. And absolutely, Dylan Fairchild has that experience playing in the SEC with Georgia. And again, he also said in his interview it would be the honor of his life to block for Joe Burrow. So that is also something you greatly appreciate. I know there were a bit of question marks about this pick, Ayden. What did you think?
Yeah, and I hate to be some big doom and gloom guy, but I just again I think it's more a reflection of the Bengals process in it all. I just think that I much would have rather see Ratledge in the second round if you want to go guard, especially because we've talked about how much of a need that is. Fairchild himself, I think he fits the Bengals mold of an offensive lineman to a T. He's a big guy. We always just look for these absolute monsters at their position. And at certain points at Georgia, his size kind of got him in some trouble, especially
Yeah.
just because of how tall he is. It was hard for him to get leverage on a lot of those guys, well, those interior defensive linemen, where guards obviously need to be a little bit smaller. But I almost like the dart throw that they threw a couple rounds later in round 5 with Jalen Rivers. And I think Jalen Rivers has the opportunity to
They
be
love Jalen Rivers in that
a
building.
better guard and
Love.
potentially starting over Fairchild when it comes to week 1. Because again, I think these two guys are going to be competing for a starting spot.
They're going to be in that mix, right? And we'll talk about this probably in the next couple of weeks of the show. There's going to be basically a battle royale at the guard spot. You're going to have both of your draft picks, Cordell Volson, Cody Ford, Lucas Patrick, who they signed in for agency. All of those guys are going to be competing in camp for those spots. And it's just going to be the best that comes out on top is going to end up taking those spots.
Well, I don't hate them going guard. Obviously, they needed to go guard with one of their top picks. It's just I probably would rather see the other Georgia guard, especially with how kind of the board.
Yeah, you probably would have rather like flipped the picks. So
right.
like Ratledge in round 2, and then Carter was there, or Barrett, or any of the other guys. So yeah, that's what we'll do on a Fairchild. By the way, Scott Peters is a big Dylan Fairchild fan, the Bengals' new offensive line coach. I do think that that's a big part of this pick. Scott Peters worked Dylan Fairchild out at Georgia's Pro Day. I do think that there is a real connection there. And Scott Peters, again, a big name to remember if you're a Bengals fan out there, the new offensive line coach, somebody who comes with a lot of pedigree, a lot of experience. So we'll see how he does with building this offensive line for Cincinnati. Moving into day number 3 on Saturday, the Bengals had 3 selections in the draft. It starts off in the 4th round with the surprise double dip at the linebacker spot with Barrett Carter, linebacker out of Clemson. Again, I actually think that these two linebackers are quite similar to each other, which is why it's kind of interesting that they went for these two profiles. Barrett Carter is as athletic as they come. There is a highlight of him jumping over, hurdling a defender in the process of getting a sack on the quarterback. He's a highlight factory at the linebacker spot, and that's something you look for as a Bengal.
No, absolutely. The athleticism jumps off the page. He's a little undersized for his position, but as you mentioned, he was a green dot guy. I think that's how Al Golden described him. Somebody who very intelligent for his position, plays a lot like Logan Wilson. He will ultimately, in my opinion, probably be the backup for Logan Wilson, and especially after losing ADG, and then you're going to be losing Jermaine Pratt. We assume you're going to be losing Jermaine Pratt. I don't hate this pick, but this also just made me more frustrated with Demetrius Knight in the 2nd round. And
again, you talk about value. Yep.
It's just the Bengals don't seem to get the best value out of their picks. But my favorite picks from the Bengals came with the next 2 picks. I think their last 2 picks in the NFL draft, in my opinion, were their 2 best ones. This one I'm fine with. It's just the size thing is a little concerning, but I think his intelligence and his athleticism, I think, will shine, and he could see the field. I think he's probably going to see the field, like we mentioned, a decent amount.
So. I think I actually, the way I envision this season going for Barrett Carter is kind of taking a lot of the role that Akeem Davis-Gaither had the last few years. Obviously, Akeem Davis-Gaither signed a free agent deal over in Arizona, but I think he's going to basically be that LB3. I think, barring a Logan Wilson injury, if that were to happen, knock on wood that it won't, I think he comes right in and probably takes that green dot, even as a rookie. And let me tell you, Carter and Knight next to each other would be a lot of fun. I think that could, and that may be where the Bengals are envisioning the future, post Logan Wilson, who does have, I believe, 3 years left on his contract. So, I mean, look, I love Logan Wilson as much as the next guy. I think he's one of the top 10 linebackers in all of football. But pairing guys like that next to him is how you maximize Logan Wilson's success. So that's a good job by the Bengals on doing that. Moving to the fifth round, where they do get, as we mentioned, Jalen Rivers, the I'm just going to call him offensive lineman because he does a little bit of everything. This guy played in almost every spot on the line bar center. Last year at Miami, he played snaps at both guard and tackle. I think the Bengals envision this guy as kind of like their call to the bullpen. Their sixth guy. I think they envision him as a potential swing tackle this coming season. Maybe even going to compete for that starting guard spot. I do think that they kind of think of him as that sort of Swiss Army knife on that offensive line, where he can do a little bit of everything, have experience at both guard and tackle, similar to Cody Ford in a sense. But I do think that they feel like they can probably get a bit more out of Rivers. It's a guy they met with in a top 30 visit earlier this week.
Yeah, I like the Rivers pick. I would describe it almost as a dart throw, but I think in the fifth round at pick 153, I think you're fine with a dart throw. I think he's someone who probably projects a little bit better as a tackle versus a guard. But like I mentioned, and like you mentioned, just his versatility and his athleticism, I think he could play both. And I think he's, again, somebody who's going to be competing for that starting guard spot. And he's definitely going to be in the mix. And this along with the Tahj Brooks pick were my two favorite picks in the draft from the Bengals.
Yeah, 100%. And I really like the fit as well. I think this is another one where the Bengals have a guy that I think that could play multiple spots along the line. And they could have somebody that is capable in multiple spots, which is big, right? For a line that always seems to have injuries, right? Having guys like that in backup roles is very important. So the Bengals will, I think, get a good selection there, Jalen Rivers. The final pick of the draft for Cincinnati was running back Tahj Brooks out of Texas A&M, their only skill position player in this draft. And I think that the one word to describe Tahj Brooks is physical. This guy does not go down after first contact. He is a bowling ball of a running back. The good thing is I think it's a different profile to Chase Brown. A different profile to Samaje Perine, who's still in that building, and Zach Moss. It's a different profile and I think this also makes the Bengals running back room a very well-rounded room of four guys. And we'll see if they actually take four on the roster. We'll see how that goes. But I do think that this continues to allow the Bengals to bolster the running back room, but also gives the Bengals a very interesting option to potentially have in that backfield, as well with Brooks' strength in pass protection. He's a very well-versed pass blocker, knows the system from Texas Tech, and he's somebody who I think can also potentially get some snaps early in the year.
Yeah, this was my favorite pick in the draft. I mean, we scream all the time, maximizing value. This is how you maximize value in the draft. This running back class was extremely deep. And it shows because you get a talent like Tahj Brooks at pick 193 in the sixth round. And so he's somebody who I think plays similarly to Zach Moss, like north and south guy, a perfect complement to Chase Brown, who obviously gives you a little bit more quickness, but has trouble kind of with these power run fits that the Bengals always struggle on. So I'm a huge fan of Tahj Brooks. I think he's somebody who's going to be on the roster, going to be on the 53-man for week one. And I think he's somebody who could get some run. So.
Yeah, 1,000%. And I like the fit as well. I think this is a guy that, like you said, could make some splashes early in his Bengals career. And that's, again, my biggest thing about this draft. I think my favorite thing about this draft is they do have a number of guys who are going to contribute early. And, I hope that they all succeed. And I think that a lot of them will be set up to succeed. Let's really quickly go through the undrafted free agent signings that the Bengals made. And the big one is a guy that I think that they snagged in UDFA, and it's Ohio State center Seth McLaughlin. He was ranked as ESPN's #1 player in the post-draft. The Remington Award winner from this past season for the nation's top center, of course, tore his Achilles during the college football playoff. Which will be a concern for the Bengals. But I think this is a guy that, with or without the Achilles tear, should have probably been drafted. And I'm really glad the Bengals picked him up in the undrafted free agency process.
Yeah, he's somebody who you probably stick on the IR. I would assume you stick on the IR for this season. Like, I don't think we're going to see him at all. But the value, like you mentioned, was there with him. He's somebody who, as Ted Karras kind of continues to age, and I know it's hard to have that conversation because of how much of a leader in the locker room Ted Karras is for this team, but he's somebody who could be your starting center in 2 to 3 years. You never know kind of how that landscape is going to go, how Ted Karras is going to age. I love that signing. That was a home run for me, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm glad the Bengals did that. They also picked up a couple of defensive linemen. Like we mentioned, they didn't actually draft one, but they did pick up two guys in the UDFA process, including Notre Dame defensive lineman Howard Cross III, who is the son of longtime NFL tight end Howard Cross Jr. He is a Cincinnati Bengal, along with Arkansas defensive tackle Eric Gregory. They both come into Cincinnati's room. The Bengals did pick up a couple of skill position guys on the offensive side of the football. A few wide receivers. Cincinnati brings not too far of a trip for Jamoy Mays. He stays with the Bengals after playing at UC. Jordan Moore, who some people may remember for that crazy one-handed catch he had against Miami, the Duke wide receiver. He is a Bengal. And they also bring in wide receiver Rashad Owens from the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Very physical and talented wide receiver there. They also bring in a tight end, Cole Taylor. Former West Virginia Mountaineer. He is a Bengal. And then this one's funny and interesting. Auburn quarterback Peyton Thorne is a Cincinnati Bengal.
Gotcha.
Peyton Thorne, very interesting career path, was at Michigan State for a couple of years. Then he goes to Auburn. So just another guy the Bengals have in the building. And then offensive lineman Caleb Etienne out of BYU also rounds out the Bengals UDFA free agent class. We've only got a few minutes left here, but Ayden, give me a positive and a negative from this year's draft. You could talk about anything.
Yeah, so positive, I think, like you mentioned, just these are guys that are going to get the opportunity to contribute. We're going to see very quickly what this draft class is about. My negatives, and I hate to do this, but I think out of all 32 teams, I think, in my opinion, the Bengals maybe had the worst draft. Just when you consider positional value, when you consider what they did with that first round, and again, Demetrius Knight being 24 years old. I think he's 4 months younger than Ja'Marr Chase, who's 25.
Yep.
It was just a lot of reaches. I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong, but it's extremely frustrating. I will be very interested to see where the Bengals go safety wise up this upcoming season, because Justin Simmons is still out there as a free agent. Do they potentially, give him a call to give some competition to Geno Stone, or do they just have faith in him? I guess we'll see. But
I think that's going to be interesting to see over the next couple of weeks. Yeah, I think keeping an eye on some of the free agents, because there are a lot of free agents that remain unsigned, because at this point they wait until after the draft. You wait until teams go throughout their process. And I think we are going to see a number of deals come through this week. We may also see a Trey Hendrickson resolution sooner rather than later. Now that the draft has come and gone and Trey Hendrickson is still a Bengal, which I think is always the best possible thing, I think that is something that's coming soon.
And I think them taking Shemar Stewart gives the Bengals a little bit more leverage in that conversation, because whether you like the pick or not, it's another first round talent that they drafted at edge that they can go to Trey Hendrickson's camp and be like, listen, if you don't necessarily love the deal that we're going with, we're going to go with Myles Murphy and Shemar Stewart, who we invested first round draft capital with. You can think of that how you will. You can say that's right. You can say that's wrong. I'm just saying it gives the Bengals a little bit more leverage
That's
in that
how
conversation when they didn't really have a lot of leverage at that point.
that's how you're going to look at it from, a Duke Tobin or Blackburn perspective, right? That's how they're going to look at it. And, we here are try to be as unbiased as we can when it comes to team versus player. So, for my positives and negatives real quick, for me, the positives is that I do think, again, like we've talked about, and I'll continue to harp on it. These are guys that are contributing right off the bat. You're not going to have dudes sitting on the bench, while picks from 4 or 5 years ago take their spot. These are guys that are coming in and contributing, whether it's special teams. Like I think Carter will play a lot of special teams this year. I think Brooks may play a lot of special teams as well. And again, they have a lot of contributors, and that's what I like about this draft. And I think, in fact, I think all 6 players. This will be my take. I think all 6 players will be on the opening 53-man roster come September, barring any injuries or anything like that. My negatives is they just don't know how to do value. They really don't. And I know we kind of had basically the same
So
positive and negative, but I think it's a fair thing to talk about is that they just don't understand value. They overdraft and even underdraft sometimes based on these perceptions that they had. The reason that they said they drafted Barrett Carter in the fourth round is because they had a second round grade on him. So if they had a second round grade on Barrett Carter and he goes in the fourth round, right? And then that's by their products, yeah, they're taking the best player available. Why didn't they use the same process in round two? Right? You see what I'm saying here? Like again, I go back to the analogy. The blinders go on, right? When they have their guy, they zone in
yeah,
and they don't. I even think back 5 years ago. I remember this distinctly where they said they were drafting Logan Wilson in the first pick of the third round. They waited. They could have traded up to draft him, but no, they said we wanted our guy. And look, that pick worked out. Logan Wilson's a great player. But they cross their fingers. They never pick up the phone. Like when was I don't the last time and I'm not saying they should have this year, but when was the last time the Bengals traded up in the first round?
Billy Price.
It's been a very long time. It's been a very long time.
Was it Billy Price?
No, the Bengals traded back that year.
Oh, traded back. Yeah, that's right.
They traded the
the
Bills.
first round that I can remember.
It was the Bills we traded for Cordy Glenn and we swapped
That's
first round picks. And with that selection, the Buffalo Bills selected Josh Allen. So, you can think about that as well.
Real quick, and I know we don't have a ton of time, but just how the first four rounds fell. Ethan, you tell me which one would you rather have? And obviously, hindsight's 2020. The Bengals could have never known this during the draft process. But here's number one: Shemar, Stewart, Ratledge, Winston out of Penn State, the safety, and then Carter. So those four versus the four that we drafted.
I think you would have gotten better value in the first four, right? Look, I don't know what the Bengals' plan is at safety right now. That's the thing. We don't know what Al Golden's vision is, or Zach Taylor. I don't know what their plan is right now at safety. They may have trust in Battle. They may have trust in some of the younger guys like Tyson Anderson or Dijon Anthony that we don't know about. So I don't know. I think right now this is going to be that's a big thing about the draft is you kind of just have to wait and see a lot of the time. And we're going to see how it goes. So that'll wrap things up for today's edition of the Jungle Fever podcast. I'm Ethan Sargeant. That's Ayden Crowley. We'll be back next week. We'll talk plenty more about the Cincinnati Bengals. See you then.